All right, welcome to week 2. We're going to jump right into the material today, and last week, just to have a little bit of review, we talked about, we made the statement, if God exists, then nothing is more important than knowing Him. If God does not exist, then nothing is more important than forgetting Him. We also talked about the Bible and whether it is a book that can be trusted. We talked about some of the reasons why it can be trusted. And so this week, we're actually going to look at the Bible itself and how God spoke existence into creation. And so, because it had to start somewhere, right? It had to start somewhere for mankind. Okay, and it's such and mankind is such an intricate, complex creation to be this self-sustaining, living being that is just amazing. If you've ever witnessed a birth, sometimes you just go, wow, it's a miracle in itself. And so, but at some point, it all came together for mankind, and there's just, honestly, there's just so many holes in the theories of evolution, the way that we've been taught it, that creation just holds a lot more weight. You can't prove yourself into believing in God. I know for me that I had to get to a point where I had researched all that I could. But there was still that point at which I finally had to take that last final step of just going, okay, God, you're out there. And those were actually my words exactly. I remember exactly where I was. I was up in Oregon, and as us Northwesterners like it, out in nature and get in touch with God out there. I remember I was out there, and I just kind of looked up at the sky, and I just said, okay, God, you're out there. Now what? And that was really kind of my starting point. That was my starting point for really trying to figure out what it meant for me to be in relationship with God, that kind of first prayer. And so that began me down this journey of really trying to figure out, okay, who are you? And why do you exist? Why do I exist? And all of those things. For other people, you don't have to do all of the investigation. For other people, there may be others of you, my wife is a little bit more like this. And she said before, I've just kind of always believed in God, that he's just kind of always been out there. She's taken some of the same classes that I have, but her faith in God has always been kind of more of a rooted, foundational, she just knows. I think that maybe women are a little bit more like this, but I know plenty of women that are also very analytical and engineers, and, they really want to investigate. And I know guys that are also just very faithful, and they just go, you know what, I just know God's there. I don't need to investigate all this stuff. I just know He's there. And so those are, whatever spot that you fall in, it's a good thing that you're taking a step forward. But as we take a look at the Bible, the first few chapters of the Bible are just amazing. Genesis, which literally means the beginning, it's one of the most amazing books in the Bible. It encapsulates creation. It's the beginning of a relationship. Everybody loves the story of a beginning of a relationship, right? How you met your girlfriend, how you met your spouse, how you went on your first date after you got on Match.com. Whatever it was, everybody loves the beginning of a story. And so with Genesis chapters 1 through 3, it's really the beginning of the story. And a lot of people, creation is very, very interesting. And I've read books and books and books on creation and the Big Bang and how that happens with God, and, how creation could have happened, how it could have happened in 6 days. I've read tons of stuff on that. But I know the reality is also this. There's 1,189 chapters in the Bible, and there's only 2 of them that focus on how it happened. Because if the purpose of the Bible was for God to kind of show us, hey, this is exactly how I did it, He would have taken a lot more time to kind of explain how He exactly put those stars into place, or how He filled up the oceans and the water that is in them and created the fish and all the science behind it and the cells, and how did He do it all? He doesn't answer any of those questions. All we know is that He created. There's Genesis chapter 1, but then Genesis chapter 2 is pretty much a repeat of Genesis chapter 1. And so really you've kind of got one short description of how creation happened. And then it goes into just exactly what this relationship with mankind is all about. And that's what we're going to take a look at in chapter 3 of Genesis. Because the emphasis of the book of Genesis is not on creation and how he did it, but who he did it for. And that's the emphasis, and you'll realize that a little bit more as we take a look in Genesis chapter 3. So, here's what I want you to do. You have a Bible, you may have one on your table, you have some in your group, you may have brought one, you may have brought your grandmother's Bible. It may be the King James Version Bible, something that was passed down from generation to generation. But we want you to open up the Bible. We'll also have it on the screen. And I'm going to read it. Let's see, if you have one of the pew Bibles from the church that you stole, that Patrick said it's okay to steal in church. It's on page 2. Genesis chapter 3 is on page 2. And I'm going to go ahead and read the first 19 verses of chapter 3. It's called the fall of mankind. Here, by the way, is the important reason that we are reading this short chapter. It's because every sermon that you listen to from here on out, it always has this chapter in mind somehow. Because this begins what we would call our doctrine of sin, our doctrine of fallenness. This is the fall of mankind. And so anytime you hear the verse, anytime you hear the verse, we all, like sheep, have gone astray, each of us to our own way. Anytime that you hear the verse, Romans 3:23, for all have fallen short of the glory of God. We've all sinned. This is where it starts. This is what we would call original sin, okay? Genesis chapter 3. Okay, the fall. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden?' And the woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden. Neither shall you touch it, or else you will die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will surely not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. Just picturing all of this kind of playing out in the course of 5 minutes. I'm sure it happened over the course of time. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God. That's kind of funny to think about. They hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself." And God said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree which I commanded you not to eat?" And the man said, "Well, the woman you gave to me to be with, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate it." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." The Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you've done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." To the woman he said, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." And to Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, and you are dust, and to dust you shall return. How about that for a scolding from God? I mean, what a mess that they have created with this whole thing. I mean, here they are, they've got perfection, and then boom, it just all comes crashing down. But there's some very interesting things that happen within this story, and that's what I want you to discuss right now. So I want you to discuss these 3 questions, okay? Number 1, what do you notice during the passage? What jumps out to you most, okay? You'll have a variety of answers to that question, and so that could get really interesting. Okay, question number 2, where is Adam while God is questioning Eve? I'm not going to give away the answer. I'm just going to give you the question. Question number 3, what kind of questions does this leave you with that have to do with the passage or how it relates to Adam and Eve's relationship with God? Maybe you could add on this question to that. What would you have done given the same situation? If you're a woman, put yourself in the shoes of, that's maybe not the right phrase, put yourself in the feet of Eve, you know what I mean. Guys, put yourself in Adam's place and answer that same question. What would you have done if you were there? So take some time, answer those questions, and we'll be back in a moment. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you had some good discussion time on those questions. It's a very interesting passage. It's a fascinating passage where you look at this microcosm of really kind of our relationship with God that happens right there in this little circle of God, Satan, man, woman. I mean, it really is this microcosm of life and how it plays out. Little temptation, a little bit of doubt, going our own way, blaming. I mean, there's lots of things that I'm sure that you notice in there, okay? But why is this passage such a big deal? I want to reiterate this again. Okay, in Christian theology, and theology, by the way, just means the study of God, Christian theology calls this the fall or the fall of mankind. And this means that the relationship between God and mankind, it was broken. It was broken because God's intention was for them not to die. God's intention was for them to live forever. It was for them to be in this paradise and walk alongside God. And and God wanted this reciprocal relationship going on with them. You know, He loves them, and they, you know, of their free choice and free will, love Him back. They appreciate His creation and everything that He created and has given to them. Yet He's given them responsibility and you know, some jobs, and so He has a sense of self-worth, you know, things like that. And God's plan was for Him to really live in their presence. And, you know, because let's face it, we would have all made the same decision, right? Maybe some of you had some really interesting answers to that question. I know if it was me, I probably would have done the same thing, you know, given enough opportunity and if the circumstances were all the same and the knowledge and all of that. I mean, I didn't even realize until about 10 years ago when I was taking it was a men's fraternity class, that we call it the 33 series around River Pointe, that they pointed out in the class that Adam was standing right there when Eve ate the apple, pomegranate, whatever it was, and that Adam was kind of standing right there. I mean, one of the questions I want to ask Adam when I get to heaven, if Adam is in heaven, I'm assuming Adam's in heaven, I don't know. One of the questions I want to ask Adam is this: hey, what were you thinking while you were there? As she was about to take a bite of that, were you kind of thinking, okay, this could be really interesting. I want to see if she kind of disintegrates, you know, or if she explodes, or, you know, what's going to happen to her? You know, had you just gotten in a fight and you were kind of thinking, yeah, she should eat this apple because, you know, it's going to cause a mess. Maybe God will make me a new one. I don't know, whatever it was, we know that Adam just kind of passively sat there. He didn't do anything, and he really had that sin of passivity as he just sat back and he just kind of didn't take responsibility, and he did nothing, and he didn't lead his family down the right road. And there's Eve taking the bite, and then the blame game starts, right? Who blames who, huh? Eve blames the serpent. Adam blames the woman, and the serpent, I don't know who he blames, but, he just, everybody's blaming one another, and it's amazing that here we are 6,000 years later, and we're still doing the same thing. When we are caught in a sin, whenever somebody calls us on something, whenever we do something wrong, our first gut instinctual reaction is to blame, and is to not take responsibility, and to blame somebody else and go, it's their fault, it's the world's fault, it's not my fault. And that is that what we would call the sin nature, that we just, because of this original sin, it created this disease in us that we just have not been able to get rid of, not in a permanent way while we're here on earth. Because of this sin, we are infected with this disease that causes us to die. And that death is both physical here on earth, and it's also eternal. And that death, it is going to happen. And so the rest of the Bible really begins this story of this journey towards a cure, towards both a cure as well as a reconciled relationship with God. Because what doesn't happen, God doesn't just kind of kick them out of the garden and then disappear forever. God still enters into their lives because he wants to have this relationship with them, but that original relationship has been broken. And God wouldn't be God if he just kind of said, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it, because essentially he would be leading them down a road. It'd be the same thing if we were a parent and we just kind of allowed our kids to do whatever they wanted to. He's trying to guide us as well and say, hey, listen, this is the best way, and this is the best set of rules and boundaries for you to live within in order for you to have the best life. And so that's what he's trying to set this up towards. But essentially, that's what plays out, especially in the rest of Genesis and Exodus. It's really it's really how God, in a lot of ways, he starts over, because one of the sad parts of Genesis is that in Genesis chapter 6, we actually get to a spot where God actually regrets. I mean, it says right there in the text, God regretted making mankind. And so he decided to wipe them out and start over. He saves one family. You know the story. You may have decorated your kids' room with the world's largest mass murder, the story of Noah, where everybody died. And so he saves Noah's family. He regrets making mankind. He saves Noah's family, and essentially he starts over and scatters people to the ends of the earth. But in the midst of that, as time goes on, about 1,000 years goes by, and God makes this very intentional move toward us. And that is the story of Abraham. Because when... And let me just read that. Let me read that verse from Genesis chapter 6. It's pretty powerful when you think about it. And honestly, it brings up more questions than it provides answers. It's one that I've gotten stuck on, but I think it's pretty interesting stuff. Genesis 6, chapter 6, verse 5. It says this: Then the Lord God saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only on evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on earth. He regretted it, and he was grieved in his heart. And the Lord said, he decided, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals, to creeping things, and to birds in the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. God wipes out all of mankind. And the scriptures actually indicate that people became more and more like animals and less like the human beings that they were created to be. It was just they became very instinctual and just kind of act of their own nature, because the sin nature, it just continued to go downhill as it was just more and more and more self-centered. So the depravity of mankind as it spirals downward is that it gets more and more and more self-centered. That's the deep depths of sin. But he saves Noah's family, and this begins a creation. This begins a new creation in the Bible. But God deeply desires this relationship with mankind still, and he wants to show himself to the nations. And as it is with God's pattern in the Bible, you'll see this throughout the Bible, God chooses the most unlikely person to start his legacy through. He chooses a 75-year-old man and a 65-year-old barren woman. She's not able to have children. And he comes to them and he appears to them and he says, I am going to make your descendants as many as the stars in the sky. In fact, he says this in Genesis chapter 12. The Lord came to Abram, which is short for Abraham, where his name changes later. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the lands that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. So he's making this an incredible promise. And you would have to imagine that Abram is standing there going, okay, God, I don't know if you've noticed this. We can't have kids. There's a problem here, and I'm not all that young. And these weren't the days of like Methuselah, who lived to 969 years old. This had started the days where people lived a lot shorter, where God was limiting them to about 120 years. And so when he was 75, he was no spring chicken. I mean, he was getting up there. He wasn't moving around all that well, okay? His wife was 65, okay? Enough said. And so for this promise, again, notice the unlikelihood. God always picks the most unlikely character to fulfill his promises through, because then no one will ever doubt who the promise came through, and it comes through God. Genesis chapter 15 says this, your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and the number of stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, so shall be your offspring. And he believed the Lord, and because he believed, another great word, maybe even a better translation for that word believe, is the word trusted. And he trusted the Lord with his life, and he counted it, God counted it to Abraham as righteousness. That act of doing the right thing, of being righteous, of believing with your heart that God is trustworthy, that was an act of righteousness. And it was a big first important step for Abram to go, okay, God's going to do this. And now we need to move forward and just trust that it's going to happen. Well, that belief really stuck with him for 25 years, with one little hiccup along the way where he takes where his wife, get this is why the Bible's so interesting. I'm telling you, read Genesis over the next week and you will go, I can't believe all that stuff happened. At one point with Abram, some time had gone by. He was now 89 years old, no child. I mean, if God's going to appear to you, if God is going to say to you, hey, you're going to have a child, you would kind of expect, okay, we're 9 months out. Like, it's going to happen, all right? 14 years go by, nothing at all. And 11 years go by, nothing happens. And so his wife, Sarah, she comes to Abram one day. She says, hey, listen, we're not getting pregnant. This thing ain't happening. Maybe we kind of misheard God. Maybe what he really meant was that you should have it kind of from our greater family. And so in those days, they would have what they would call maidservants, manservants. And so Sarah suggests to Abram, she says to him, hey, I have a maidservant. She's young. She's pretty. She is of childbearing years, unlike me, who is now 76 years old. take my maidservant. Maybe the promise is supposed to happen through her. Okay, and let this just be a clue to you. As it was that many years ago, this is now roughly 3,800 years ago, anytime a woman suggests that another woman enter the relationship with a man, nothing good ever results of it. And the same was true in this case. Abram then takes a woman named Hagar, the maidservant. They have a child. His name is Ishmael, and that creates a big giant mess between Sarah. She's always jealous of Hagar and Ishmael. There's question over, who's promised? Does it really lie with? The Bible's clear that it lies with Isaac, who they then had 14 years later when Abram was 100 years old. 100 years old. Sarah was 90. She was 90 when she had Isaac, who the promise was to be fulfilled by. That was where the true promise lied. And it is amazing because, but this was God's promise to them. And because of their patience, they were able to finally see this through. Isaac is born, and that really launches the Israelites. And so here's what happened. We're going to put this on the screen as well. I'm going to sum up the rest of Genesis in a nutshell. But here's the people to remember. Okay, Abraham is really the beginning of the God making a move toward us, toward having that relationship, and also to be able to show the world who he is through Abraham's family. Okay, Abraham then has Isaac. Isaac, which is Genesis 21 through 26. Isaac then has Jacob, and that's Genesis 27 through 36, the story of Jacob. Jacob, his name was changed to Israel. Sound familiar? That is where we get the country of Israel, the Israelites. Okay, that came from Jacob. Jacob then he actually had 12 sons. And that's where we get the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, and one of those sons, his name was Joseph. Joseph really begins the Israelite journey into this next chapter where they end up in Egypt, and the Hebrew people, the Israelites, they populate in a massive way, and the story kind of continues from there. So that is kind of the beginning of God making a move toward us. It's us making this decision and saying, God, I've got this. I'm going to do this my own way. And because of that, there's this break and there's this separation in our relationship with God that needs to be fixed. Not only does it need to be fixed because when we have broken relationships in our lives, we want to fix them, but this is a relationship with someone that is the most important person you can have a relationship with, and that's God the Creator. And so God deeply desires for this relationship to be healed. And by God making this first move towards Abraham, that's really the first step. And so the story of Genesis is really how God begins to interact with this family and how he is in their lives, and some amazing things happen. But he also is leading them towards a very difficult period, which we're going to get into next week. So now we're going to transition to some sermon discussion. And so take a little break. I know you guys have got a lot of great food that you brought. Grab a new snack, and then we're going to roll some footage of this last weekend's sermon and bounce around some questions from it. So grab some food and have a great discussion, and I'll see you next week.